Hello, everybody. Happy Valentine's Day and happy Black History Month. Before I get too deep into the introductions, before I forget, let me just encourage you to definitely participate actively in this event by putting your comments and your questions in the chat. We will definitely notice them and get to them in due time. So thanks for that. Thank you for supporting Book Passage with events like this online and also now in person. Check our website for which is which. We have events going on in the Ferry Building, in Corte Madera, and online. So definitely just go to our website for where to find the event you're interested in. Well, welcome to a special edition of our Conversations with Authors program. This is called Race and America, an annual event I started in conjunction with Book Passage in 2019, maybe 2018, but I think 2019. Initially, it was an in-person panel event, and we'll probably go back to that at some point. But then we pivoted for obvious reasons to doing either a panel online or, like tonight, a mini series with a total of 6 authors and activists, but spread out over a 3-night period. And this is the first of it. We do it in honor of Black History Month and recognizing the importance of uplifting diverse voices and stories. We cover a range of provocative issues and exploring possible solutions featuring authors and agents of change. With that, let me introduce our brilliantly talented authors and their books. Black on Black, on Our Resilience and Brilliance in America. Daniel Black is a nationally renowned award-winning novelist, and that's the title of his stunning title. You can't miss it. The book is right behind me. He's a nationally renowned award-winning novelist. His works are inspired by African-American life, history, and heritage in the South, encompassing themes of race, religion, sexuality. In this, his debut essay collection, Black gives voice to the experience of those who often find themselves on the margins, tackling topics ranging from police brutality to the AIDS crisis, to the role of historically Black colleges and universities, to queer representation in the Black church. Black on Black celebrates the resilience of Black people. Daniel is an award-winning author and professor of African American Studies at Clark Atlanta University. His books include The Coming, Perfect Peace, and They Tell Me of a Home. He lives and will be joining us from Atlanta. Joining Daniel is author and attorney and activist Kristin Henning. Her book, Rage of Innocence, is so timely. It's Rage of Innocence, How America Criminalizes Black Youth. It's a captivating analysis of the foundations of racist policing in America, the day-to-day brutalities largely hidden from public view endured by Black youth growing up under constant surveillance, and the persistent threat of physical and psychological abuse by police. She draws upon many years of experience representing Black youth in Washington, D.C.'s juvenile courts. She is a nationally recognized trainer and consultant on the intersection of race, adolescence, and policing. She is Bloom Professor of Law and Director of the Juvenile Justice Clinic and Initiative at Georgetown University Law Center. So with that, I am turning it over to both their capable hands, and, just brace yourself. We're in for a treat tonight.
All right. Thank you so much, Paula. I got to say, it's an honor to be here, Black History Month, with someone that I have long admired. I know Daniel Black's work as a fiction work, right? Completely knocked off my feet when I read The Coming several years ago. So I really blown away. So I thank you for all that you have brought to the table. And I'm just excited to be here to talk to you about nonfiction. So,
absolutely.
This is your first piece of nonfiction, as Paula noted.
It is.
Yeah. So, I figure I'd love to. We're just going to go back and forth for those who are listening. I thought it'd be a fabulous way for us to start. I would love to hear sort of what motivated you to write in this way. And if you
Yes.
will, like, I just think this idea of why writers write is so important. You have a quote that literally on page 19 of your book that just blew me away because it resonated with me so much. If you don't mind my reading from your own book, you write.
Yes, ma'am.
You said, I write because we rape. I write because we hurt. I write because some pain can't be described. It can only be felt in the marrow of a story or the lyrics of a song. And that just really, really, really spoke to me. But it spoke to me mostly for you as a fiction writer, right? Telling those stories, right? And we can talk in a minute. I actually borrow storytelling for my book, which is truly, nonfiction as well. So I'd love to hear more about how do you write about Black America, both in fiction, and why did you shift to nonfiction?
Absolutely. Well, first of all, Kristin, I'm so happy to be here with you. I don't know what to do. And I'm so excited, of course, to talk about The Rage of Innocence too, because this book has been so enlightening for so many, many reasons, which I will absolutely explicate here in a moment. But to answer your question, I decided to do nonfiction, Kristin, for two reasons. One of those is I feel like the killing of Black people, especially young Black people, is so out of hand in America now. It is, and in fact, if we're not careful, it's becoming so commonplace that the entire nation is becoming numb to it. Which means in a minute, we're gonna deem it insignificant. And I decided there were some things I needed to say to America, to the world, that could not possibly get lost, if you will, in the beauty, in the accoutrement of fiction. I didn't want it to get lost in a character. I didn't want it to get displaced in a fictitious dialogue. I wanted to say some things very intentionally, some things very directly. I wanted to say some things that could not be dismissed. I wanted them to be so raw and so naked, if you will, that the world couldn't miss it. And so I decided to do this nonfiction effort. And I have to tell you that it's been amazing. It's been glorious. And people's response has been absolutely unreal. So I'm very, very happy about that. And the truth of the matter is, people always ask, who's your audience? And I always say readers. Whoever reads is my audience. It's juvenile, it's unintelligent, it's immature, to think that some writer writes only for some small group of people. Any writer writes with the hopes of being read, regardless of who does the reading, So,
Right.
So I wrote this book with the hopes that it might touch enough of us in America that change might occur.
Yes. So I got to say that resonates with me so much. And it's interesting because I'll admit, as a lawyer, law professor, I practice and I represent clients, so I have to tell stories. But
Right.
my work as a professor has been almost overly academic. And I realized, Daniel, that in order to change hearts and minds, I needed to learn the art of storytelling.
Absolutely.
And so this book for me is like the first effort to bridge exactly what you just described, the truth telling in very candid and explicit ways with a story, but not made up stories, right?
That's
not
right.
fiction, but
That's
real live stories about young people that I have represented in the juvenile courts across the country. And
Yes.
so it's an art that I literally I just learned to love, this art of storytelling as a way to bring about change and to tell the truth. And so I so appreciate that. At the end on page 21, you also have another quote. I was just, feasting on this. It says, "So I write, and I'm going to write until the wind outsings my pen. If there is no paper, I shall use the wall. If there is no wall, I shall use my hand. If I must relinquish my hand, I shall use the very earth upon which we stand and scratch into the dust the sentiment of liberty. I feel the same way. I literally feel the same way. I have to go ahead and tell people, look, read my book. But the last sentence of my book, I was sharing this book. I tell stories about my clients, children I represented. And I was sharing this with one of my former clients and with his entire family. And they were like so excited. They were like, these are the stories that need to be told. That's exactly what they said to me. And my response was, and they are right. These are the stories that need to be told, and I will keep telling them until there are no more stories to tell.
That's
and this is the work of what this is all about. How do we, talk about, race in America?
Absolutely.
Part of it is through the pen, part of it is through the story, part of it is through the explicit narrative. I'm going to tell you as it is. So
yes, that's absolutely right. And it's funny, as I was reading your book, Kristin, I was I teach at a Black college, and I've been on faculty for 30 years. And as I was reading your story and reading the unbelievable testimonies, one of the things that hit me so hard that I'd like to ask you, one of the things that hit me so hard was, you were talking about the criminalizing of Black people's bodies.
Yes.
Right? And even this foolishness that, sagging pants somehow prepares a person for criminal activity, or wearing a do-rag, some kind of way is a sign, of some soon coming criminalization. But what was really profound to me, Kristin, in your book, is the way in which we criminalize Black babies' bodies.
Yes.
I was thinking, even a kindergartner?
Yes. People are blown away. That's part of the reason you got to tell a story, because people are like, you don't know what you don't know. We don't even think about it, but we think about, there's stories upon stories. Some people may remember the, just recently, ProPublica, the news outlet ProPublica, blew up this story out of Murfreesboro, Tennessee, where the judge, was basically incarcerating or detaining Black children for crimes or for behaviors that did not even constitute a crime on the books in Tennessee. 8-year-olds, right? First graders, this group of kids between the ages of 8 and 11 years old were arrested and sent to detention because they were watching a fight taking place on a playground between two older kids. And what was their crime? They did nothing to break it up. Like, what? It's just nonsense. And it really was, all of it is about, and you talk about this in your work, like the commodification.
That's
what are the reasons that we would do such a thing? Why would we criminalize? There's so many reasons. One is the dehumanization of Black bodies. And that means the dehumanization from birth. Right? That's not an adolescent phenomenon. It's not an adult phenomenon. They come out of the womb, right, as an inanimate object in the minds of power holders. So you've got that, right? So the dehumanization and then the commodification. Like, what can I do with that Black body? And if I can't do anything with that Black body, the least that I can do is prevent it from being and achieving and accomplishing in ways that reduce my access to resources.
Absolutely.
So I talk about in The Rage of Innocence, there's a point where I say, it is no coincidence, right? It is absolutely no coincidence that some of the most high profile acts of violence against Black people have involved Black children, right? Because think about Emmett Till. It is precisely efficient and expedient to kill the Black body in childhood or adolescence, right?
Absolutely.
To set the boundaries of whiteness, to set the boundaries of supremacy, before a Black child can even grow up, become independent, and assert their right in society.
And another thing on page 85, and I marked it, and I'm going to tell you why I marked it. You say, the brute and Jezebel stereotypes have been manipulated to advance important economic and political interests favoring whites in American history. And I thought about the ways in which a young Black boy being seen as a brute actually increases the American economy.
Mm.
And it made me connect it, Kristin. I'm probably in trouble for this, but I'm gonna do it anyway. It made me connect it even to things like modern day NFL players, and the ways in which Black bodies, are still manipulated for economic interests in ways and to degrees, right? Far disproportionate to white bodies, right? I thought about the NFL. I thought about the NBA, right? The ways in which they pay millions and millions of dollars, right, for the activity of these bodies. But those exact same bodies in a classroom, they might pay barely thousands for.
That's right.
And it made me see the ways in which not just in enslavement, talking about stereotypes of Jezebel and Bruce, etc., but the ways in which those tropes of slavery have evolved.
That's right.
Into new modern tropes. They did not disappear.
That's right. And look, I mean, you think about like from the creation of adolescence, and most people don't think about adolescence as a creation, a social phenomenon, right?
That's right.
We didn't even think about adolescence before the Industrial Revolution, right? But coming with the Industrial Revolution, not only came adolescence, but it also came other social institutions like juvenile courts, for example. And the reason why I tie that to what you're saying is even then, the very founding of juvenile courts was actually designed as a quote unquote benign progressive era movement that was taking children out of adult criminal courts, right? But here's the thing, how the trope started operating there was the sense that Black children can never be rehabilitated, right? They were not deemed worthy of this effort of rehabilitation. They were not seen to be morally sound or morally capable of contributing to society. And in fact, just like what you said, one of the tropes is all we can do for Black children is turn them into labor, right? So we treat them like, so every institution I think of that has formed, in society is built in some variation on that trope, right?
That's right.
And so here, talk about NBA, you talk about NFL, the idea is how can these folks be used to make me money? Yes, they are paid, inordinate amounts of money, but nowhere near what the owners and the advertisers and all of the other, industry is around it, is made, right? So it's the commodification of bodies in every single institution, that we look at. And it's just, it's beyond disturbing. And I also think, look, we can be, hyperbolic and we can be black and white, you and I in this conversation, but we recognize some of the nuances, right?
Absolutely.
We recognize how complicated some of these questions are, like the questions around, NFL players and NBA players, and to the extent that they, themselves are taking ownership and commodifying themselves, in order to take a piece of American society. But I think what we're bothered by, you correct me if I'm wrong, is what we're bothered by is the ways in which just you talk about that contrast. But we don't have the same opportunities to enter that education space or that business space or all the other spaces in which Gates made tons of money, right? Like, why can't we make that money in other spaces?
That's right. That's absolutely right. And in Black on Black, I talk about this commodification, of course, of the body, and the ways in which I think Black children in America grow up being taught directly or indirectly. And I think it's probably both of them. As you said, this is a nuanced situation. But how Black children are taught that, in fact, your body is your meal ticket.
Right.
If you're Black. That's and the emphasis that's put on aesthetics for Black people differently, what you look like, what your hair looks like. Certainly as a Black woman, you understand this. Black women can't just get out the shower and do this and go. There's a whole way in which a Black person's hair has to be maintained and kept, right? And the ways in which our bodies signify to people our worth.
Right.
Right.
This is so true. I mean, and look, Yeah, I think about this, and this all ties in with the criminalization of adolescence. So when
Absolutely.
I talk to folks about this, I ask people, I say, what did you care most about when you were a teenager? Right? You cared about the clothes that you wore, the music that you listened
Right,
to, the
right,
way you styled your hair, the
right,
friends you got to sit with in the
right,
cafeteria. And that is the heart of what it means to be an adolescent, right?
right.
That creativity and that energy. And I think about my clients. I got to tell you, wearing, their hair, and this is my view, in creative styles,
Right.
in their natural, free-flowing styles, the male and female, and it's exactly as you describe. It becomes an offense to others. It
Absolutely.
becomes and you talked about it at the outset, the sagging pants and
That's right.
that's stylistic, right? And I
Right.
tell people all the time, think about like the hippie era, the tie-dye t-shirts and the bell
Oh,
bottoms.
absolutely.
Nobody criminalized that, right?
Right.
You know,
Right.
there was, yes, some assumptions about whether or not, those folks, of course, and it was associated with weed and hallucinogens, but nobody was criminalizing them. People weren't locking those folks up, right? The way
Or
we do
let's just
today.
or we could just talk about rock music.
Oh, yes, yes.
You-
Country. Yes.
Listen,
Country music. Oh
listen,
my God, don't get us started.
the goth movement,
Oh
kids
my God.
is black, but nobody thinks that you're evil just because you have on black.
Exactly. And I'm gonna take it one step further, right? So there's also the steel-toed Doc Martens with red shoelaces, which young, white male adolescents, some white male adolescents have adopted, white supremacists have adopted as their iconic, symbol, right? We have not outlawed any of those styles, right? And we don't look at them and think criminal in the same way we look at sagging pants, the same way we look at a hoodie and think,
Right.
criminal. It's
Right.
huge.
It is
It's
huge. And something else you explain in your book, and I talk about in Black on Black too. In fact, I'm just floored at the parallels between our books.
Yes.
I really, really, really am. And that is this notion of the ways in which America has believed from the inception and even now that Black behavior has to be controlled by the law, right?
That's right.
That in fact,
That's right.
we can't just discourage sagging pants. We need it to be illegal.
That's right. That's right. And then we think, oh my God, it's so true. And that's truly, right, all about the ways in which, look, here's the way I like to think about it. Even when we as a society get annoyed at the recklessness and the impulsivity of white adolescents,
Right.
we still treat those children with grace, tolerance,
Absolutely.
redirection, support, right? Nobody is locking that kid up. And
Right.
even for serious stuff, right? I'm talking about, you could press it further to experimenting with drugs, experimenting with alcohol, experimenting with sex, all of it. And let me be clear, Black parents are listening and saying, but I don't want my kids to do any of that. But guess what? All y'all did it too. All of y'all experimented and y'all came out just fine. That is a part of normal adolescence. And actually, the research even shows that it is precisely that risk-taking, that boundary testing, right? That experimentation that allows you to thrive as an adult. If you were scared and under the rock, but for Black kids, no. Any step out, you talk back to a teacher. I don't want that either, but it's a part of adolescence.
Absolutely.
They're impulsive, emotional, reactive. They're fairness fanatics. You talk back to a teacher, you play on a cell phone, all those things, and you're getting regulated by the law instead of by parents.
In fact, I remember Kristin being in college, and I remember I went to college here in Atlanta, Clark Atlanta University. And I remember going to a white school whose name I won't call, but I remember they regularly had what they called keg parties. And the thing that messed me up about it is, I said, how do you get to have a keg party? Because a keg is an entire barrel of beer.
That's right.
But nobody's 21.
Right.
Because college age students, by the time you're 21, it's time to graduate.
That's right.
And I said, how do you get to have a whole keg of beer on a white campus? But if we had a 40 in a brown paper sack, the police are pulling over.
That's right.
I said, do the police not know about these keg parties?
That's right. That's right. Well, honey, look, child, forget the keg party. Think about Kyle Rittenhouse. Don't let me go there. Right? You got like, talk about oh my God, like the embodiment of how different Kyle Rittenhouse was treated than Tamir Rice, right? I mean, you've got a 17-year-old child walking down the middle of a street in public view with an assault rifle, right? Why? Because in his 17-year-old brain, he thinks he's competent enough to go out and help, you know, protect businesses in a Black Lives Matter as if it needed such a thing. You know, and it is absolutely the epitome of dumb adolescence, right? You know, it's impulsive, it's reactive, he's following his friends, he's doing what his friends do. He's not thinking ahead to the strategic, you know, thinking ahead to the long-term consequences. None of that. Right? Nobody stops him. How long has he walked with a gun and nobody stops him? Now, granted, you know, it's an open carry state, whatever. But like, you know, our clients, my clients, Black clients who live in open carry states still can't open carry, right? You know, if Tamir Rice had been, you know, in Wisconsin, he still would have been shot. You know, it's just, you're absolutely, it's somebody put it to me, it was very interesting. Like, it's not even just the privilege of white adolescents, but the extraordinary permissiveness of white adolescents. You can have a whole keg on a college campus and be just fine. Supported even.
Just fine. It's true. No, it's absolutely true. And another part of your book, which parallels to a part of my book, was when you were talking about policing as trauma.
Yes.
Right. That I think, and you talk about policing by proxy.
That's right.
Right. Which I think is so important. And I have a chapter in Black on Black wherein I'm looking at, you know, this history of policing and what has been the effects of policing and how we are just, how since the time of slavery, you know, and I think it's so important to point out that really historically, policing was not an issue of keeping citizens safe. It was keeping white citizens safe.
That's right. That's right. That's right.
And I think that's very important for us to understand because once we understand that, then when we understand and we see police really, really bearing down on Black bodies in public spaces, it becomes sensible because it's certainly not agreeable, but it becomes sensible because ultimately the job of the police is to keep white folks safe from Black threat.
That's right. That's right. And the presumption of Black threat, you know, forget it.
Right.
You know, I mean, your chapter does it beautifully. You lay out, you know, we parallel a lot. We pick some of the same stories to revisit in different ways. But your chapter, the trial and the massacre of the Black body, and one of the things that there are several things in that chapter that really struck me. But this idea, right? Truly, here it is. Officers deemed, talking about George Floyd, you were talking about George Floyd and the ways in which, you know, they stopped him, God forbid, for passing a fake dollar bill, whatever, right? But then, and this is the heart of it, the officers deemed him unruly. Right?
That kills me.
Oh my God, over and over and over again. And let me tell you, you know, as Paula said, I've been representing kids for 25 years. The number of encounters that go from 0 to 100 in an instant, right? And it's in an instant, and in part because there's so many reasons, right? You know, my chapter, Contempt of Cop, gets at this, but part of it is just, for me and the kids I represent, it's just being adolescents, right? Because like I said, they're emotional, they're reactive, they're fairness fanatics. Right. And these officers keep coming at my community and I'm gonna speak out, right? But then, you know, as you said with adults, George Floyd, like they're all deemed unruly, right? Just the matter of attempting to assert one's, you know, citizenship in this country is an act of unruliness, an act of defiance of authority. And so that, I mean, I'm telling you, and I think it's one of the things about writing is that, you know, telling people, you know, who don't know what they think they know, right? Like you just don't know what you don't know. And yes, we saw what happened with George Floyd, but I can't tell you case after case after case that starts as something stupid, some little, you know, minor misdemeanor behavior
That's
becomes the killing of George Floyd. How do we get from there to there?
Yeah.
You know, and that's just, it's
Because
just,
really, in most of these police says psyche,
yeah,
they arrive at a Black body already prepared to destroy it psychologically.
That's right.
They're already psychologically prepared, and they're also asking the question of, oh God, what is it going to take to restore order here? But really, there's nothing. But there's no lack of order. You know, it's like Black presence automatically means defiance.
That's right.
You know,
Presumption.
And yeah, exactly, the presumption, absolutely. Another thing I think that's so important, you know, when we're talking about Black bodies and race in America, et cetera, is the ways in which we also have got to do this examination of the ways in which Black women's bodies pay, right, for the maintenance of white supremacy. Right. Because most of the bodies that we see in the streets, most of the bodies that police kill are Black men's bodies.
That's right.
But there are ways Black women's bodies pay too, right? That I think is very important, of course, you know, that you point out too, right? And it makes me think of things like stripping. It makes me think of things like human trafficking, because you know human trafficking is so huge.
Yep.
And what's so interesting to me, Kristin, is like I've always thought like when you know if you kidnap these 11, 13-year-old girls, where do they go? Where do you send them? Like, is somebody buying people and selling people? Like, do they just vanish into thin air?
That's right. Right. And then nobody's following, nobody's tracking, nobody's looking, right?
That's
like,
right.
You know, for them.
That's
and
right.
The parents and the families, you know, cries go on deaf ears. But I mean, you're so right about girls and women on so many different levels. I mean, you know, you started talking about, you know, trafficking, thinking about, again, all of this ties to, you know, commodification, and commodification
Absolutely.
leads to criminalization, right? Like when
That's
we can
right.
when I can no longer commodify you, then I'm going to criminalize you. And what we see, for example, with human trafficking with young girls is that white girls who are trafficked are considered victims, right? Black and brown girls who are trafficked are arrested, you know, on prostitution charges, curfew violations, incorrigibility, right? And you know, and sent to to detention facilities after having already been traumatized, right? And then they go to these detention facilities or long-term incarceration facilities where they can be subject to what? Further, you know, sexualization of their bodies. It's just, I mean, it's just so painful to think about. And you're so right that I think so much of the conversation about the criminal legal system and about police brutality involves Black boys, right? And Black men, and we forget that Black girls, and you do a good job. You talk about, you know, Sandra Bland and Breonna Taylor and all of that. And I got to say, you know, somebody asked me as I was writing my book, you know, whether I was going to do a chapter on girls. And I said, you know what? I'm not doing a chapter on girls because girls are going to be woven from page 1 to the end, right? Because all of the phenomena that we see, right, from the tropes, the racial bias, the presumption of criminality, whether it's through, you know, hypersexuality to, you know, to whatever, you know, whatever the myths are that send children, Black girls into juvenile court are in every single one of the stories. That's right. And I think that, you know, we forget that, and we forget that especially Black, especially, you know, prisons and jails are simply not equipped. No, or aren't equipped, period, to serve Black children at all, or any child, but certainly, you know, Black girls in particular.
It's true. Paula posed a question here in the chat that I want to get to. She says, were you as surprised with the Tyree Nichols situation or murder as most? The processing of that was so complex for the Black community because his unfair death, but at hands of Black officers. See, for me, it wasn't complex. And the reason it wasn't complex is because the fact that the officers are Black is irrelevant.
That's right. That's right.
It's the policing.
That's right. That's right.
That officers are trained to do. And listen, there were Black slave catchers.
That's right. Absolutely.
You know what I mean?
It's absolutely.
Yeah.
It absolutely. That blue line is thick. And I'm not going to pretend like, because I really do like to make sure I hit nuances. I unequivocally recognize, and I have engaged with some Black police officers who are as traumatized and appalled at the state of policing in America. But you better believe that that blue uniform carries with it in and of itself such extraordinary weight. And that the way police academies are trained to operate, that literally it's almost like, I don't know, they're transported.
No, it's true. It's true.
Yes,
it's true.
right?
That blue uniform does the work of white supremacy, regardless of who wears it.
That's right. That's right. That's right. And let me come back to another point, right? So you asked about trauma. I'll always say, right, that blue uniform has such a long history in America that Black folks are terrified, and Black children, the clients that I represent, are traumatized by the sheer presence of police. And there is empirical research documenting, the ways in which Black children experience, fear, anxiety, depression, hopelessness. They become hypervigilant in the presence of police officers, right? And when I ask my clients about what does it mean to be in the presence of a Black police officer, they were like, it's the same and worse, because they feel particularly violated by a Black male or Black officer, in treating them in the same ways. Absolutely. And it's hard. Even the officers who think, right, the Black officers who think they're in tune with the Black community, I think forget it. They forget how traumatizing their presence is. And they talk to us about how their promotions, they get written up. They can get reprimanded for not doing what they have been trained to do in academy.
That's right. Yeah. That's absolutely right. And Anita asks me if I will write more nonfiction. The truth of the matter is I think I will write some more nonfiction, but I'm going to also return to fiction. I have a novel coming out in a little while, but I think I will write some more nonfiction, because there are a few other essays I would like to write, Anita, like I want to write a full analysis of the fugitive slave law of 1850. I think that has so many implications for shaping the way we understand Black volatility, the way we understand the price of Black people helping one another, the ways in which Black people were deemed fugitive just because you were Black and in America. That's right. That everybody's a fugitive. Everybody Black is suspect, right? I think the fugitive slave law of 1850 shapes that narrative, and I still think that we've not gotten past it. The other thing, though, back to what we were talking about, Kristin, is this notion. Where did I put it? That I think is so powerful in your book, and that is this stand your ground. Right?
Oh, right.
Wow. See, what's so tricky about the stand is, right? It presupposes the righteousness, right, of white citizens, because it presupposes that you, as the white person, you're supposed to be where you are.
Right.
Right. You're in your rightful place. This is your country. It presupposes that you get the right to, quote unquote, stand your ground. All of that is saying that to be suspect of the intruder.
That's right.
Right.
That's right.
So there's all this seemingly ambiguous language.
Absolutely.
Right? But it's not nearly as ambiguous in application.
That's right. And often misapplied, right? Completely misunderstood, right? And it's one of these sort of the twist of the law, the twist of the theory in order to achieve exactly what you're saying, for white folks to use. And they've talked about, the data shows the ways in which stand your ground has been made available to white folks in defense of alleged Black perpetrators, but not the other way around.
Right.
Like there's no Black person who can claim stand my ground, right? Like that's just it's not a thing, right? And the ways in which it's so extraordinarily distorted. So, for example, I'm thinking about the case of Jordan Edwards, who, playing loud music in Florida, and he's at home, right? He's in his home city, right? Playing, loud music. And Michael Dunn, white male from out of town, comes, parks next to him at a gas station, tells, Jordan and his friends to turn down their music, right? And, they do for a second, but then they're like, wait, why am I turning down my music? Like a teenager, and they turn it back up, right? And then, he claims that they're trying to threaten him and he shoots them, and then, at least initially the thought was, well, we're going to do a stand your ground defense. I'm sorry, what? Like in every, I'm being very flip with this, in every way imaginable, that is everything but stand your ground. I'm sorry, you're not at home. This is not your turf. You came to their turf. You parked next to them. You claimed your right to be free of their Black music, right? But yet you stand your ground. He ultimately did not get to avail himself of that defense, but that was the initial idea, right? That's how distorted the concept comes, right? That's right. It defies all common sense.
It does. It just really, 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 really does. And even when Trayvon was killed, right? And they found George Zimmerman, of course, not guilty because of this stand your ground law. What I think it showed me too, Kristin, is that if you're looking for righteousness and the legal system to align, you could be looking a long
time. And let's be clear that the law has always been designed to advance the interest of white folks. That's just, it is today. Right. No, and we're scrubbed from it. We're scrubbed from it. And let me, I always like to correct this. It's Jordan Davis, not Jordan Edwards. But this is what the tragedy of my mistake is, how many kids have been killed by the police. That I flipped their last names. Because Jordan Edwards was killed in Texas. Jordan Davis was killed in Florida. Again, by a white person, but anyway, sorry. But no, you're right. It's just all of it is appalling. I think one of the things that we wanted to make sure we talk about it, I think in your response to Anita's question about what you will write next and what you're interested in the ways in which we help each other as a Black people, takes me somewhere else I want to go, which is the Black institutions. And love, the ways in which you write about the Black church, and that's complicated, narrative right there, right? But I spent a lot of time thinking, what do we need from the Black church and other Black institutions around several issues as it relates to the criminalization? So one is, what is the role of the Black church in preventing, standing guard against this criminalization of Black youth, right? As a preventative measure, what is the role of the Black church in healing our Black children who have been traumatized by this history and legacy?
Well, first let me say that I think we need the Black church.
Yeah.
I think we need the Black, I'm clear of some of the issues and some of the very nuanced struggles around the Black church, but as an institution, I think we need it. And quite frankly, I think we need it desperately, right?
Yeah.
I think we absolutely need it desperately. What I also think is that we've got to overhaul it without fear. See, some of our fear of overhauling the Black church is we think we're going to offend God.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Black people think we're going to offend God when it's God didn't make up the rules of the Black church.
Right, that's right.
God didn't even write the Bible. If
that's
we're
right.
going to, if I'm gonna really, really, really go there, right? And I'm saying this because we need institutions desperately. In fact, any nation, any culture is perpetuated by its institutions. Right. And the Black church is certainly one of them. And without the Black church, there would be no civil rights movement.
That's right.
Right. Without the Black church, the African folks in those initial years of enslavement would never have survived. Without the Black church, in fact, what most people don't know, without the Black church, there would be no Black education. because the black school was in the black church. The black church was the school.
That's right. That's right.
For many, many, many years in this country, the school and the church were the same building.
That's right. That's right.
Right. And I think that's very important to say. So the black church has done remarkable social and cultural work. But what it's also done is some very damaging spiritual and aesthetic work. Right. And so there has been some self-hatred perpetuated in the church that we need to excavate for sure.
Absolutely.
Right? But we desperately need the church. We desperately need the church. We need to throw away things, though, like women can't preach. I mean, it's silliness. We need to absolutely throw away things like sexuality is sin.
Right, exactly.
God, Lord have mercy.
Right. Absolutely.
I would vote for us to get rid of the whole concept of sin myself.
Right. And this notion of somehow that there are gradations of sin. Also.
Oh, God.
Right. I'm gonna tell you, look, you know, I shouldn't even say that. I'm gonna get in trouble now. Right. Look, you can, rape, maim, like a pastor can rape, maim, and kill, but like you talk about putting a gay man in the church, and it's like up in the pulpit, and it's like the greatest sin of all. I'm like, well, I'm sorry, where did all that happen?
And that gay man might be celibate.
Right, exactly. And certainly not taking advantage of other folk and this,
that's
that,
right.
or whatever it is.
That's
it's
right.
a mess. It's a mess. And then also too, I think about how painful it is for me when the Black church joins in the presumption of criminality of Black youth.
That's right. That's right.
And that's at the worst end of the continuum, or at a bare minimum, right? And that's because of respectability politics, right? Buying into the sagging pants and the dreadlocks or whatever it is. All of that is a presumption of criminality. That's a problem we as a Black church have to relinquish, right? But then beyond that, right? Like you write it beautifully. I wonder if I wrote it down. This is it on page 86. The average American sits in anger and wonders what they can do. The church seems similarly paralyzed. So even as we watch, right, the criminalization of Black youth and the demonization and the killing of Black bodies, we don't stand in the gap. Like, I want a new civil rights revolution. I want y'all marching. And we did. Like, we came out like after George Floyd. And that's part of the, folks don't know what they don't know. The number of people who read my book and are shocked at what's going on in the nation's juvenile courts. How many children? People believe that when we talk about arrest, prosecution, and detention, we must be talking about the most serious violent offenders: rape, murder, carjackings. And the reality is that's what you see on the news, but 90%, and this is not an exaggeration, of children across the country are there for absolutely stupid, minor behavior that all of us did when we were kids. And that's where I want the Black church to stand up, step in the gap, and say, we're not going to take this line down. So it's that, in order
for us to do that, Kristin, we have to get to the place where we assume Blackness divine. See, unless and until we can get to the place of making the assumption of divinity over Blackness, what we do, and I told the crowd this the other day, subconsciously, too many of us as Black people, we make the assumption that Blackness is flawed from inception.
That's right.
And when it is excellent, we applaud.
That's right.
But we make the assumption that whiteness is excellent from inception.
Right.
And when it is flawed, we are disappointed.
Ooh, go speak it. Yep.
Right.
Yep.
And so what we have to do, see, if we make the assumption of Black divinity, then even something like this 12-year-old boy, who stole my wallet, that's not a criminal.
Right. What's the root of that?
Now, it may be true that he stole the wallet. We don't have to erase that.
That's right.
Right. But there's a way, I believe, there's a way to handle that situation such that that boy does not leave there with a record.
That's right.
And such that he doesn't believe within himself, right, that something is inherently flawed in him And he inherited a trauma he can't do anything about.
That's right.
He's just a criminal because he comes from a long line of criminals.
That's right. That's right. The stigma, right, that comes with it, the internalized self-hatred that comes with the trauma that is associated with systems involvement. And so when we talk about like public safety, or we talk about, I don't want my purse stolen, I don't want my purse stolen either. But like the way we get there is societal reform. It is not locking kids up under a jail, because what you do, and people just, don't realize that. It's actually that over criminalization, the over systems involvement, allowing the state, right, to police our children actually increases crime instead of reduces crime. We're actually making ourselves less safe by doing that. And that's the problem. And people don't, and there's research. I'm not just, blowing smoke, right, through anecdotes. It just, the strategies that we've got don't work. And mind you, they're the strategies we're using on Black kids. Because you better believe at the white school down the street, right, that private white school, they're doing worse. There's rape, there's all the things, theft, all the things that teenagers do, and nobody's sending them to court. I'm gonna tell y'all, I say this in my book, I say this when I go out and talk. I have been representing kids in the nation's capital for 26 years. And in that entire 26 years, you all, I've only represented 4 white children. That's it. Every other child I have represented in this city has been Black. Not because they're not white kids here, not because white kids don't commit crime, because we don't arrest them and send them to court. And it's not just me and my caseload, it's all of us. You don't see it. That's an appalling proposition. It's an appalling proposition that uniquely Black children are deemed criminal. And I have to say, a lot of this, and depends on where you live in the country. For those of you out in California, you'll see a lot of Latino and Latina youth out in those courts. In the District of Columbia, even our Latina youth don't make their way very often into court. So it's appalling the way we perceive and treat Black folks. I see Paula coming back in. I see a question in here. Left again.
In fact, Kristin, there's a question that I think is really interesting about defunding the police.
Yes. And I know I see the question.
Paula, you're muted. You're muted, Paula.
Yeah, there are a couple of comments and questions in there. And I just want to, I know this is kind of casting a large net, but hearing you talk about kind of the disregard, dismissiveness of Black bodies, it's so weird that we're in 2023 and everything you're saying is so true. We have so much evidence weekly, daily, but it's just so weird. It's the same.
Right.
I mean, it's presented differently, but it sounds like what enslaved people went through in a different way. It's civil rights again. And,
it is.
Black people under Jim Crow. It's just like, when are we going to get past this and really make some strides? I mean, is there any room for hope here, or any room for us impacting? Is it through voting? Is it through defund the police, which somebody mentioned there, about, white people lose their minds when you use that terminology. I'm going to throw that to you.
I just want to say this very quickly. And I'm jumping in here because this is a very important point to me, that we cannot solve any of the racial issues in America because we won't tell the truth. That's why we just keep changing the colors of the oppression. We just keep changing the uniforms, right? Because we keep lying about it.
Right.
We all this critical race theory, all of this is, don't say anything that's going to hurt the little white kids' feelings.
No.
Right. See, again, we can't tell the truth about it. We keep creating lies because the truth is so ugly that the truth would actually contradict the very idea of America.
Yeah.
But we could heal it if we would tell the truth about it.
Yeah.
It's like a person being raped and the rapist coming and saying, wow, we had a difference of opinion, didn't we? Hell no, we didn't.
Right.
No, we didn't have a difference of opinion. What? Are we going to recast this as if we were in an argument? Right. You see what I'm saying?
Absolutely.
But the truth would be someone would have to say something to themselves that is so absolutely self-deprecating, that is so absolutely ugly, that they just are unwilling to do it. And so we simply recast the lies.
Yeah.
That's really powerful too. I think it is absolutely, the inability of folks, and particularly white folks, to tell the truth about
That's
the
right.
history.
That's right.
And this fear that like somehow, I mean, that's, look, it's human nature almost. Like, I don't want to admit my worst, worst aspect of human nature. But then it's also, I think, beyond that, right? Like it's even those, right? Even those folks who are woke and who acknowledge the truth aren't willing to sacrifice, right? So that means in order to change, right, we've got to be willing to say, okay, my, ancestors, right, were responsible for the legacy of disparity that we have in our country, and I need to sacrifice, whether that's a material sacrifice, whether it's an inclusive sacrifice, like I'm going to share power with other people, with other, races. I think that's another step that's really hard for people to do, because you want to self-protect, you want to save for your children, right? And then the third piece of this, I think, also is that Black folks.
That gets into reparations. When
exactly.
Reparations, really talk about it, actually apply it.
That's right.
Different ways it could be come out as.
Absolutely.
Because then you have to admit that they deserve the reparations.
They deserve it.
The history is what it is, and it has systemically affected a whole group of people, Black people.
That's right. So you got to be willing to admit that reparations are owed, but then you got to be willing to give it out of your pocket. That's the thing, right? And so it's a double hit. And then I also think, though, this question about, is there ever hope? It's the rising up of a people, right? Black folks, brown folks. It's a rising up, and we don't do that on every issue, and that worries me, right? Like, we are a people divided in some ways, divided around class, divided around respectability politics, divided around what we think the best strategy is or not. And I think that's where we as a community also have to come together for more power and greater voice. And I think this question around, sort of defund the police, just to answer that fits into a number of this. That's absolutely right. People lose their mind when you start talking about defund the police. I'm gonna tell you what. Also, some Black folks, lose their mind when we start talking about police-free schools. Well, I'm not sending my child. And you know what that's about, you also, and it goes to this question about defund the police. It is because we in this country lack the imagination and the commitment to the research-proven, evidence-based best practices for safety, so that people have bought into the only tool we have been given, which is the police. If we would invest in a continuum of mental health services, invest in smaller class sizes, invest in, social emotional learning for young people, all these things, we could improve radically public safety and school safety and not need police, right? So I hear that. I try not to traffic in the explosive language like defund the police, only because as an activist, I need to win people over. And so my strategy is like, think about so much less about defunding the police than figuring out what the police are really good at, what they're really needed for, and get them out of everything else. And guess what? That's about 90%. I don't need them to teach my kids. I don't need them to intervene in a drug overdose. I don't need them to intervene in a mental health crisis. I don't need them to get my cat out the tree. Look, right? Like all the things we call police for. So I
think it's become obvious, and especially when you brought up the Tyree Nichols situation, that the police have become more about violence and oppression than protection and service. And, if they can't do that, bring that back, and they need outside organizations to bring that, we've got to start being honest about that, because it's too much. It's not to serve and to protect anymore. And
see, here's the problem.
Especially for some communities, Black and brown communities.
Sure. But part of the problem, though, is, and part of the reason that even taping and watching Black bodies being beaten in the street does not really fix the issue is because in the American imagination, particularly in the white supremacist imagination, the beating of a Black man's body represents ideas of safety. Actually, to beat a brother down.
That's a good point.
To beat a Black man down makes other people feel safer.
That's absolutely right.
Sure.
That's absolutely right. That's right. And then you traffic.
That's why people have been wondering, like, why in the world having these beatings that we've been caught on tape? Why hasn't this caught on? And why hasn't this done amazing work? Because actually showing that around the world makes people say, good police. Yes.
That's right.
Yes,
that's right.
Yes,
that's
yes.
right. And that's right. And then they intentionally follow those beatings with the narrative that the Black Mike Brown, perfect example, right? You beat him to a pulp, and then you literally have, Officer Williams describe him as a monster, right? And you talk about, find every negative anything that you can concoct about him being threatening and demonic, and dehuman, in order to justify what you did. Every single, example is followed by that pattern. Trayvon Martin going to get Skittles, right? And a tea gets, but he was walking through the neighborhood in the rain. Why would he be doing that in the rain? I'm sorry, because I need to go get my Skittles. But that becomes out of place and suspicious. And you deem everybody as demonic, in order to justify it. And that's exactly what you're talking about, Daniel. It then feeds the cycle. I killed the person because they deserve to be killed. And people would rather believe that the only reason a police officer would do that is if indeed the person was frightening and terrifying. So it's a whole narrative.
And an angry Black man is already scary.
That's right. That's right. Unruly, threatening, aggressive, and scary. That's right.
Absolutely.
That's right. That's right.
So somebody subduing him looks like safety.
That's right. That's right.
I mean, I feel like as much as you two brought to the table, we only scratched the surface. Like, I literally had like notes of, we need to also talk about this and this and this.
Is our time over? It's not over, isn't it?
It is over. I'm so sorry. But, what a great conversation. These are the conversations that matter, the books that matter.
That's right.
Everything my two guests have been discussing is in their books. And by the way, Kristin's book is now, I don't know if it was released in paperback.
It just came out. Like, I was at an event yesterday and I saw it, and somebody had it in paperback. I was like, where did you get that? So it just came out. It's been in paperback. It's been in hardback for like a year and a half.
And not that we're hating on hardbound, because this is a great book.
My book just came out last week.
Yeah. And these are the type of books where you're reading with a highlighter, or you're putting Post-it notes in, and you're buying other books for other people that are interested in this. I know everybody loves fiction for book clubs, but in my book club that is made up of Black and brown women, we like to mix it up and throw in a really good, nonfiction that you're going to talk about, something that's going to spark discussion. These are the important conversations, and you offer some answers. Obviously, none of us have all the solutions, but we're trying to get there and go in the right direction. Thank you so much to both of you.
Thank you.
This is amazing. You're both amazing. I can't believe you're just now connecting, but I'm glad that we could bring you here through Book Passage and Race in America annual event. I'm going to tap you again for something. Is that okay?
I'd be happy to.
Back in.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, I want our audience to know that we have plenty of both books at both locations, San Francisco, Corte Madera. You can go into both stores, buy it, You can call up, order over the phone. You can do it online. We're happy to serve you. But the important thing is to support these conversations, these stories, these authors. So we encourage you to do that and support your independent bookstore, which Book Passage is at. We're going to have more discussions like this for the next 2 nights. Tomorrow night, I can't believe I'm the one that organized it. I'm going blank on my guest. Oh, it's Roberto Lovato and Dr. Reina Leon. So yeah, we have lots to talk about, and great people that are going to kind of steer the conversation. Join us tomorrow, same time, 5:30 Pacific time, live online at bookpassage.com. For now, though, thank you so much, Daniel, Kristin.
Thank you.
Much
Glad to be
love.
here.
Happy Valentine's.
You too.
Take care.